Mr. Premier, Barbara, Elita, honored guests, this is a special day. It's the culmination of 4 years, 3.5 years' work. We decided to establish this center 4 years ago during Mr. de Klerk's life. We did so because South Africa's negotiated transition from white minority rule to multiracial constitutional democracy was the greatest thing that we South Africans ever did in our long and troubled history. So we think that this needs to be recorded, it needs to be remembered, and it needs to be explained. We also wanted to provide a narrative of the genesis of our Constitution. How did it come about? Because our Constitution provides the foundation for our new society, and it continues to present the best basis for a free, just, and prosperous and secure society and future for all our people. Finally, we believe that our experience in transforming our society has a significance that transcends South Africa, because it shows the international community that even the most intractable problems can be solved rationally, peacefully, through negotiations. It's a message that the world needs right now. We didn't call this exhibition the FW de Klerk Center for Constitutional Transformation, because we wanted to reflect the reality that this process was the creation of all South Africans. And you'll see as you go around the exhibition that there are little QR codes. And on the website that accompanies this exhibition, there are also links to deeper and deeper information. And we hope that we will be able to get the comments and contributions and interviews with people from across the spectrum who were involved in this historic process. We want this to reflect the points of view of all of those people and parties and movements that participated in this unique process. Now, I might say that in the whole scope of human history, this kind of peaceful, negotiated transformation, fundamental transformation of a society is very rare. Machiavelli said, if a prince decides to introduce a new order of things, he should think again, because it's a very dangerous process. But we achieved it. The exhibition that we have created tells the story of how we moved from the darkness and injustice of apartheid and the crises of the mid-1980s to the adoption of the 1993 interim constitution, the elections of the 27th of April 1994, and to the adoption of our present constitution. The story is told with 34 panels that you can see around you and 5 videos. It is replicated in a website that provides visitors with all of the information in the physical exhibition. The panels, as I mentioned, include QR codes that allow visitors to drill down to further levels of information. And it is our intention that the QR codes should include further information and interviews with participants across the spectrum. We hope that the exhibition and the website will become a source of information for anyone in South Africa and in the international community who is interested in this historic process. The exhibition will be open to members of the public from the beginning of 2025. Because of the limited space in the exhibition, it will be necessary for visitors to make reservations and purchase tickets beforehand. It will be open on application to high school learner groups, to students who make the necessary arrangements. Unfortunately, there's not time this evening or this afternoon to take all our guests through a guided tour of the exhibition. We can take 20 people at a time. It takes about an hour, so that's 3 hours. However, should you be interested in such a tour, please contact Jill Weir or Brenda Stain, and we will include you in groups that we will take around and answer any questions that you might have relating to the exhibition. In the meantime, I shall give you an overview of what the exhibition offers. It is divided into a prelude and 5 chapters. We will now run through the Abby, you're ready. Okay, it starts with the prelude on apartheid. The first period of apartheid, of absolute white domination, Baskap. And then the second period of apartheid, separate development, which lasted for 20 years under Hendrik Verwoerd and Foster, which brought us into nowhere and to further injustice and crises. And then the third period, which was reform. This was when FW de Klerk took over, and he said we have to adapt or die. And this involved the abolition of some of the more repugnant elements of apartheid and the introduction of the tricameral system to bring coloreds and Indians into the polity, but only 21% of Indians voted in the election and only 18% of colored. So it was, again, a farce. This then opened the way, the reforms that FW de Klerk initiated created enormous inflammatory expectations. It opened the way to the riots and unrest led by the UDF that brought the country to a stop, that resulted in the declaration of 2 draconian states of emergency in 1984 and 1985. And then this then took us to what we call the perfect storm. You think that we've had problems in the last 5 years or 10 years. You have to cast your mind back to 1985, 86, when the only light at the end of the tunnel was the oncoming express train. There seemed to be no hope. We had these nationwide riots, we had a state of emergency, and then FW de Klerk gave us the Rubicon speech, which failed completely to reassure South Africans and the international community that we could resolve our problems. It led to the collapse of the rand. The rand went through the floor, to further international isolation. The West tried to solve a problem by sending an eminent group. The response of the SADF was to raid 3 neighboring countries while they were in South Africa. The third element in the perfect storm was the escalating war in southern Angola. Our defense force was involved in large-scale battles with Russian and Cuban-supported elements as late as 1987, 1988. The battles of the Lomba River and Cuito Cuanavale were some of the biggest battles that were fought in Africa since the Second World War. So this looked like, as we say, the perfect storm. And then we had glimmers of hope. Things were starting to change. South Africa was changing behind the scenes through normal socioeconomical processes. More and more black kids were passing matric. 15,000 passed matric in 1980. By 1994, it was 200,000. In 1994, there were more black kids at university than whites. In fact, it was 40%. So these things were changing South Africa. Wealth was being redistributed. And of course, all of this made a nonsense of the idea of separate development. It meant that the country had an integrating economy, and there was no way that we were going to be able to unscramble the omelette. And the next glimmer of hope was the beginning of informal talks. You don't get peace in our kind of situation until all of the main parties have decided there cannot be an armed victory. And Nelson Mandela realized this in 1986 when he opened a line of communication to P.W. Botha. And then there were talks, extensive talks between business groups, academics from South Africa with the ANC in places like Dakar, in London, in Mel's House, and in Lusaka. This started to change the situation and prepare the ground for the changes that were coming. And then the next glimmer of hope was the tripartite accord, this very dangerous situation that had developed in southern Angola and Namibia was resolved when we were able to reach a historic agreement in 1988 between the Cubans, the Angolans, and ourselves. And this involved the withdrawal of Cuban forces from Angola and the independence program for Namibia. So this was another green light on the road to transformation. And the next glimmer of hope was that on the 2nd of February, a year to the hour before his famous speech, 1989, FW de Klerk was elected leader of the National Party after P.W. Botha had sent a surprise message to the National Party caucus that he was resigning as the head of the party. And he won that election by only 8 votes. And he immediately signaled his intention to change South Africa. He went on an international tour. He spoke with Maggie Thatcher, with Chancellor Kohl, with President Mitterrand, said that he was going to change South Africa. And they said, if you do this, we will support you. And that then went through to the next, what we call the New Dawn, when FW de Klerk became president on the 20th of September, 1989. And just a couple of months later, the Berlin Wall fell. And that had an enormous impact on the pace of transformation in South Africa. De Klerk started to normalize the process in South Africa by permitting peaceful demonstrations and by dismantling the P.W. Botha National Security Management System. And then, on the 2nd of February, he made his speech which changed South Africa. He realized that the circumstances, the balance of forces, would never again be so propitious for negotiations as they were at that moment. He announced the unbanning of the ANC, the SACP and other revolutionary organizations, and the imminent release of Nelson Mandela. He opened the door to negotiations. In fact, the journalists whom we briefed on that morning, I think it was Alistair Sparks, said, "My God, he's done it all." And that is what had happened at that time. And that brought about the release of Nelson Mandela on the 11th of February 1990, and the whole ball game was changing. Now it was negotiations. The next phase in the New Dawn was the first talks with the ANC, which took place at Groote Schuur here in Cape Town in May 1990, in Pretoria, and at DF Milan Airport in 1991. And things were going well, except that the country was riven by more violence that we had had than before the announcement of the transformation process. And this was addressed by the National Peace Accord in September 1991. And that helped to address the deep concerns of many of the parties relating to this huge problem of violence. That opened the way then for the formal negotiating process at CDSA. And this commenced in December 1991, and it was based on a declaration of intent, which actually included nearly all of the things that were present in the final constitution, negotiated constitution. The idea of the rule of law, separation of powers, non-racial democracy, they were all in the declaration of intent. And it's very seldom that a transformation process begins with a declaration that is more or less achieved at the end of the process. And then, unfortunately, there were problems within the white community because these reform measures had caused concern among right-wingers. And they won some critical by-elections at the end of 1991 and 1992, the beginning of 1992 in Potchefstroom. So de Klerk, against the advice of his closest friends and colleagues, decided to declare a referendum among the white voters, which he won by 69%. So it was a great vindication. And then, unfortunately, CDSA broke down. It had made quite a lot of progress in working out the outline of a negotiated settlement, but it broke down because of disagreement about the percentages that would be required to adopt the final constitution, and then because of the Boipetong massacre in the 17th of June, 1992. ANC furiously said they criticized the government for being involved in this. It was later proved that this was not the case, but the ANC then embarked on what it called a process of rolling mass action. Demonstrations throughout the country, strikes. We were very close to the brink when ANC demonstrators marched on Bisho, the capital of the Ciskei, and 28 were killed. And I think then Nelson Mandela realized that this was going nowhere and that we should resume negotiations, which we did at the Record of Understanding, where Rolf Meyer and Cyril Ramaphosa came together and they ironed out an agreement for resumption of negotiations, which involved basically accepting the work that had been done at CDSA as a basis, and then the release of all remaining ANC prisoners, and then securing IFP hostels and prohibiting the carrying of traditional weapons. Now, this brought the ANC back on board, but immediately the declaration was made, the IFP jumped off the train, together with other right-wing parties. So the next shock for us was the report of the Goldstone Commission, which discovered on the 18th of November 1992 that the military intelligence department of the South African Defence Force was still carrying out covert actions against the ANC, against the explicit instructions of President de Klerk. So President de Klerk appointed General Pierre Steyn to investigate the situation, and this resulted in the dismissal or compulsory retirement of 6 top SADF generals. And that was the last problem we had with the SADF. That brought us then to the next chapter in the process, that is the resumption of negotiations in the multi-party negotiating process, which based a lot of its work on the agreements that had already been reached at CDSA. And the key question was, how would the new constitution be adopted? The minority parties wanted the constitution to be adopted first and then to have the first election. The ANC said, no, the constitution must be written by a duly elected parliament. And so they came to a very good compromise, and that was that there would be two constitutions. First of all, the interim constitution in 1993, which would include 34 immutable values that would have to be included in the final constitution. There would be a government of national unity, and there would be a transitional authority to make sure that the election was free and fair. And it was on this basis that the parties agreed to the interim constitution in November 1992, which was adopted by the South African Parliament on the 22nd of December 1992. And 12 days earlier, on the 10th of December 1993, FW de Klerk and Nelson Mandela were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And that was, I think, it gave a great deal of encouragement to all of the people in South Africa from all of the parties who'd been working for this agreement. We then had a roller coaster ride to the 27th of April 1994, with plenty of crises along the way. Bophuthatswana, one of the homelands, had prohibited electioneering in its territory. President Mangope of Bophuthatswana invited the old SADF leader Constant Viljoen to come and protect him from a mutiny in his own territory. The AWB invaded the territory in a chaotic and indisciplined manner and were repulsed. This led to the overthrow of President Mangope, and then to the continuation of the election in Bophuthatswana. The final problem was getting the IFP on board. The IFP had been boycotting the process. We had talks between the IFP, the ANC, and the government throughout March, April, and then finally, with only 8 days to spare, Buthelezi agreed to participate in the elections. We managed to produce stickers at the bottom of the ballots to include him, and the IFP joined the election process. And that then went to our first freedom election, 27th of April 1994, which of course the ANC won with 62.6% of the vote. The National Party came second with 20.6% of the vote, and the IFP third with 10.5% of the vote. And this really was the culmination of this first part of the transformation process. And it led to the establishment of the new South Africa and to the appointment of the Government of National Unity. In the Government of National Unity, it was President Mandela and then Deputy President Mbeki and Deputy President de Klerk, because his party had achieved more than 20%. The IFP had 3 ministers because they had received more than 10% of the vote. The National Party had 6 ministers, and I think the ANC had 18. So this then led to the inauguration of President Mandela on the 10th of May, 1994, one of the great days in South African history. And it then also led to the establishment of the Constitutional Assembly. The idea was that the newly elected parliament, including the National Assembly and the Senate, as it was then called, would sit together as a constitutional assembly, and they were given 2 years to hammer out a new constitution. And the new constitution was agreed to really exactly 2 years later. It was submitted to the Constitutional Court for approval. the first time the Constitutional Court said no, some of its elements didn't comply with the 34 immutable principles, was sent back to the Constitutional Assembly. It was amended and then finally approved by the Constitutional Court and signed into law on the 10th of December 1996. And that really was the birth of our new Constitution. As Christo mentioned, the essence of the Constitution is the preamble. It is the vision of our new South Africa, of our new society. It is what we want to achieve as a nation. And then it's based on the foundational values that Christo also mentioned. We believe that this still provides the best basis for the future of South Africa. The Constitution has served us well. You might be interested to know that, well, it's now 28 years old. The average life of a constitution in Africa is 10 years. In the world, it is 17 years. And as the joke goes, France has had so many constitutions in the last 200 years that the National Library refuses to keep them because it doesn't deal with periodicals. So we can be very proud of this Constitution. It saved us from state capture. Without the Constitution, we would not have survived the attempts of Jacob Zuma to undermine our democracy. It has been invoked on many occasions to protect and expand the rights of ordinary South African citizens. It still presents the best foundation for a peaceful and prosperous and secure future for all our people. As Christo said, our goal must be to make the Constitution a lived reality for all our people. And that we've still got a long way to go on that. Now, 2024, let me tell you, the situation in South Africa could have been much, much, much worse than it is today. There could have been a catastrophe, societal collapse, civil war, but it could also have been much better. And where we have failed because we have not followed the guidelines and the values in the Constitution. So that sets up the challenge for all of us in South Africa. It's to make this Constitution a living reality for all our people. And I would just like to thank all of those who have made such a contribution to the creation of this exhibition, to John Arvanitakis and Josh de Bruin of Chatter, the company that created this, to Mark Bernabé, who helped us with our videos, our staff who was behind us all of the way, to our donors, to the special work that Elita did in raising funds for this exhibition. We hope that this will become a place that tourists will visit, because when foreigners come to South Africa, they think, well, this is the country that changed. This exhibition will tell them how it changed, how the process worked. It will also, we hope, inspire young South Africans. That's why we see the website as the main vehicle in many respects for this information. But we think that young South Africans should also know about how their country changed, how it was born, what their constitution means, and why it is important. Thank you very much.